Why do you think now is the right time for podcasting 2.0, value for value? Why is this the moment where people are going to switch from advertising to this business model? Is it because of the ability to now seamlessly earn money online through Lightning Network or through Bitcoin, or is it maybe increasing pressure from censorship and concerns about what kind of information you can share? People maybe opting for an audience first approach. Why do you think now is the kind of right time for this model?
So Dave Jones and I started this project about a year and a half, 2 years ago, almost a year and a half. And the genesis of it was multiple steps, but it's when I met with Steve Jobs in 2005, I guess it was, and he's like, okay, put this in. I want to put this in iTunes, do podcasts. Great. I'm going to give you our directory. Here's the 3,000 podcasts I think we had at the time, iPodder.org. It was an open directory. It was a cool project by itself. Because I was just thinking broadcasting. I wasn't thinking about radios. I knew that, holy crap, Apple's going to make it much easier. This will be good. That was a mistake in hindsight, because what happened is with podcasting being by default highly distributed, I mean, there's 50, 60 podcast hosting companies around the world, probably more. So it doesn't come from one place. I literally made Apple the default on-ramp because of their size. So you had to go through the registration process with them to get into the Apple Podcast app, which for a permissionless, decentralized concept is messed up. But it was worth it because Apple, and by the way, Apple was a very good steward. They played very nice in general. And that went on for a long time. And it's one thing when you're building a radio or a podcast app and there's a couple 10,000 feeds out there. It's another when there's 4 or 5 million. So in order to actually make an app perform well, I mean, you're now in it. This is always the case with distributed versus centralized. It became a little bit heavy for an app to track all of the podcasts. And so what all the app developers started doing is accessing this open API that Apple had on their podcast database, their index, because that's how their app worked. So by default, it kind of had to be an open system, and they let everybody use their API to build podcast apps. And there's many successful podcast apps besides from Apple, and one is Overcast. And I was listening to Above Tech podcast, the developer, the owner of Overcast app, Marco. He was talking about how Apple had been messing around with their API, and it was with their Apple News podcast. And so now if you queried the Apple News podcast, it would give you back the data, but it wouldn't actually tell you where the RSS feed was. So you couldn't parse that yourself. Now they were messing with an openly distributed system. Okay, it's their own, but they proved that they were not trustworthy. They're willing to mess with what comes out of the API. Simultaneously, there was this takedown that Apple really spearheaded of several podcasts. Alex Jones, X22 report, some QAnon stuff. It's like, and whatever. But it was a coordinated takedown. Facebook and Google, everyone participated overnight. All of these podcasts were gone. Now, because all the independent apps were using the Apple database, all these podcasts also disappeared from all these apps. Like, oh no, that's not okay. Same time, I just kind of met Joe Rogan, and I've been on a show like 4 times now. The first time, and this is where he told me I got this deal with Spotify, and I'm like, oh, that's really great, Joe, but I got to do something because I have to, because Joe Rogan also left all these apps. This was the #1 podcast, arguably. Okay, so how do we keep the open podcasting attractive for the next 10 Joe Rogans? Because they'll be there long after I'm gone. There'll be great Joe Rogans and Joe Roganites and Roganettes and whatever. We'll have all kinds of super successful people. So we need to be able to incentivize everybody in the chain. And this is what's never really happened before. So Apple had no incentive to run an honest open database because they make no money off of it, and they provided no support, and they kind of do what they want to do. And they, in fact, pivoted and said, there's no money in podcasts. I'm going to do subscriptions. We'll just leave this other thing kind of running. Value for value or donation type systems had also proven to be a problem, such as Patreon, which was it's based upon what we do, with levels that, they still have levels and things, and it's not as open-ended. It's a little, but it was more of a platform. And they had also proven that they were willing to deplatform people from the payment world, even for something you might have done on a different platform. Someone had said something over on YouTube. Well, we don't like that you said that there, so we don't want you on your platform. No more money for you. And this started to go down the line to the payment processors, to MasterCard, and the people who actually do the money changing, who already are making it hard for even legal dealers in states where it's legal of marijuana products and other types of things. So now you have a problem with being deplatformed from the apps and from the money. And so Dave and I had been doing enough RSS work with this Freedom Controller project we've been working on that I called him up and said, and we do this all the time. I said, I think I got a project. This one will work. This is going to be great. And by the way, we got to fix this because this is messed up. We've got to build a new index, a new database of podcasts. Everything's in there. We don't take anything out. We keep it, tidy, and we'll offer a free API to developers so they can switch over, use our open database, and we'll kind of see where it goes. We're going to extend podcasting, so we want to put in new features. Since the problem has always been, for a decade, there was no new features in podcasting because the hosting companies would have to implement a new feature in the feed that their customers use, and then mainly Apple would have to understand that change and implement it. And Apple never communicated with anybody. They didn't care. Like, we don't care about podcasting. We love it. People buy our devices for it. We don't really feel like getting into development. They didn't say that, but they said it by never doing anything. So we said, look, we're the new guys. We now have more feeds than Apple with a free API. Everybody can connect to it. Hey, hosting companies, we got some ideas for some new features. And the first one is we got an idea for value in streaming money, and we'll use the Lightning Network, which is this kind of Venmo for Bitcoin, which allows for very cheap, very fast transactions, true micro payments, which is one of the big promises of the internet. Promise number one, your refrigerator will know when the milk has run out and will automatically order it for you. Of course, that's bullshit. That hasn't happened yet. But micropayments hasn't really happened either because of the transaction fees, which is never feasible. And so now there's this blockchain type token thing that behaves like money, that was perfectly appropriate for us to implement this. And I said, well, why don't we put these two things into one, the new index, a money flow that goes directly from the listener's podcast wallet, as we call it, from their app straight to the podcaster, and will incentivize everybody, including the app developers, by enabling a split. So if someone is going to give $1 to a podcaster, the podcaster can say, okay, thank you for your $1, but I want 5 cents to go to the app that I'm using, that you're using at this moment to listen to it, to incentivize the app developer to do more work. I want 1% to go to the podcast index because they're providing the free API. And I want 30% to go to my co-host or my producer, and I'll take the rest. And that's actually, so that the app gets that information from the index, that payment information, and then the app that the listener is using sends all those individual payments directly from them to those recipients. No middleman, no one's in the middle, real time, uninterruptible. And we rolled this out, and because of how you extend a technology like RSS, it's called to something called a namespace, which basically says this RSS feed utilizes extra features. It's this feature set, it's like we uncorked this huge, just geyser of creativity of all these features people had wanted to implement for a decade, and we just started doing them. Like, fuck it, yeah, we'll put in chapters, and we'll put in transcripts and people links, and and geotags and what, trailer bits, and now we're getting very close to comments on an episode that work in any podcast app. So you can comment on one app and it'll show up in another one. I mean, this is the holy grail, right? So all this stuff just started rolling, and just like podcasting 1.0, I started podcasting 2.0, the podcast with Dave, and we just started, and we'd have now we have tools, right? Now I can bring in the developer who's in Germany, and we can talk on the show, and it sounds good, and it's not, shit's not breaking. We couldn't do any of this 20 years ago.
Right.
So this is now, it's an animal, and we're just creating all this amazing stuff. And of course, we had a high uptake of Bitcoin podcasts, who saw, like Marty Bent, and also I have to say, Paul and the guys over Paulito and the guys over at Sphinx, they really showed us how to do this. They had all of the bits, and then it was like we had chocolate. And we bumped into their peanut butter at the right moment. Like whoa, and we were all super excited. And then we just got this thing kind of working, and that was a model for other developers. And then Tim Kay came along with lnpay.com, and so we're able to do kind of this interim custodial, but at least we can bootstrap the idea as self-custodial wallets, I think is the term that's going to be used as those start to come online with projects like Greenlight and stuff. So we're just bootstrapping this thing, and I think the critical difference of this open project is that it's also funded value for value. So if you don't send us a donation, we're going to have to stop. By the way, you can, every week there's a fresh new copy of the entire database. All of our code is in GitHub. You could compete with us tomorrow. If you got $1 billion, go build a new index. Good luck. And then of course, but what binds it all together is the splits. So when one person's successful, everyone else in the chain wins, because they get a piece of it, and that's built into the spec. It's built into also the philosophy of the value for value podcasting, that the app developer gets a piece. The hosting companies are coming online. They will probably make deals with their customers to get a piece of a split. Maybe you don't have a monthly fee. I mean, we have a real economy, a real use case here that is, I think, one of the best ones of the Lightning Network and perhaps of Bitcoin itself.